Certainly with D&D, I'm a narrative player. I consider myself a narrative player. I consider myself a narrative DM. I love encounters. I mean, that's the wargaming influence coming in. I love fighting dragons. I love utilizing miniatures. But I'd say in a given night, an average Fritz adventure, that would be maybe like 30 or 40 minutes out of like a 3 or 4 hour gaming session. You know, there's going to be some encounter that's going to be very, very interesting, very, very tactical, but it's not hack and slash. Not that there's anything wrong with a hack and slash adventure. So I want to do something completely opposite for this podcast. I want to break down D&D into the math hammer, and I want to understand the ability to build dice pools and the ability to gain bonuses and just how important this is. Every class needs to be able to do this, whether it's arcane or combat or some other method in terms of abilities. We're going to look at it from the lens of a fighter, not because it's the most simplistic, but it's the most straightforward. And it's not necessarily the easiest. You need to generate massive amounts of dice, of damage, to be able to hit, simply to knock down those monsters. And there's 2 phases to the game. First, you have to actually be able to hit. You can do all the damage in the world, but if you can't hit the target, it's not going to transfer. Then once you hit, so we need to build Dice Tactica for that. Then once you hit, you need to be able to have a big enough pool of dice and modifiers to damage. And then after that, if you can apply a secondary effect, because you've already gone through the hard stuff of hitting and dealing damage, if you can build in a secondary effect that now carries over into next turn, that doesn't have to hit, that doesn't have to cause damage, this cascades, and you'll be able to work very, very quickly, especially through some of the more powerful monsters. Of course, they're going to have resistances and other things trying to work against you. So let's talk about being able to hit first. Everything revolves around the D20. And that D20, you're going to roll once. Unless you have a hindrance, you might have to roll it twice and take the lowest. It could also have an example where you have a bonus, an advantage, so you roll twice, take the highest. But essentially, it's going to be from 1 to 20. And some of the monsters that you fight later on, you're not going to be able to hit just on the base D20 alone. You know, you'll need like a 26, 28, 30 to hit them. So no matter what you roll on the D20, you're not going to be able to hit them. In theory, yes, there's imperfections in each D20, so the stat-wise, it might skew from one side to the other. But essentially, you're going to get a number from 1 to 20 in there. The next piece is the innate ability to hit. And again, remember, we're looking at this from the perspective of a fighter. A wizard, a sorcerer, a rogue, they're going to have to look at it from their own point of view. You're going to get bonuses to hit based into your character. This represents training. This represents innate proficiency. You know, at the earlier levels, it might be +2, +1, +2. Later on, +3, +4. Now you're adding that. So essentially, you're shifting the scale. Let's say it's +3. You're shifting the scale of the D20. Instead of 1 to 20, now it's 4, if it's a +3. 4 to 23. So it's shifting. You're adding that on there. It's shifting the push of it. You're getting closer to that higher number. Again, like if we need 30 to hit armor class 30, you're getting closer. Depending on the version of D&D that you're playing, certain feats, certain weapon proficiencies and specializations, that's going to give you a further bonus. Now, this is where D&D, if you do this at multiple levels, it just becomes insane. Because these +1s, these +2s, these little pluses that push the range of the base D20 out, those are always in effect. That's what's crazy. A +1 or a +2 in D&D, a +1 sword, it is a big deal because you can always count on that +1 working. Compare that to some other wargaming systems. And again, we're looking at D&D just from a wargaming perspective. You look at other wargaming systems where, okay, you need a D6 and you need a 3 or higher to hit. But then if you use your special ability, you roll another d6, and if it's 1 to 3, it's nothing. If it's 4 to 6, it's +1. There's bonuses that might not work through. D&D, that +1 is that +1 forever. That's why cleric spells, on a side note, like Bless and other things that just give you a +1 luck bonus or a +1 save, massive, because they stack. So we're going to have feats, we're going to have innate ability, we're going to have weapon specializations. As you level up, as you gain, this is now going to be, before you roll that d20, +3, +4, +5. So we're still looking to work to hit. Now we loop in magic. And with magic, there's going to be constant effects, such as if you're holding that +1 magic sword, you've got that +1. It's good the entire time. I mean, maybe it's even good if it's in your belt. As long as you've got the sword, +1. Spell effects that last a certain duration or a certain time, they'll wear off, but for the sake of combat, they're in effect. So those bonuses now get added on. You want to look, as you level up and as you build your character, how can you get the most bonuses to hit? Because you have to hit first. Before we get into anything else, you got to hit. Got to hit the target. So now we move to damage, because you landed that blow or you hit. And some things like magic spells, they auto hit. Something like magic missile completely bypasses that. So now you can just go right on to damage. Lightning bolt, the classic lightning bolt fireball, D&D spell. You've kind of arrived there as a wizard when you start to be able to cast these spells. If you can line them in the area of effect for the lightning bolt, or you can hit them with the blast, you don't have to hit. Now, there might be evasion, there might be resistances. That's kind of secondary. But sometimes you can bypass the hit altogether. Now, when we get to damage, you generally, from a fighter's perspective, you want to get the biggest chance of dice that you can. A D6 for a short sword, a D8 for a long sword, that's a big difference. That's a possibility of 2 extra points of damage. That's where we want to go. If I can get a D10 or a D12 on there for damage, that's where we want to go. That initial damage dice tied to the weapon, tied to the attack, you want to look to get the biggest that you can. Now, often a 2-handed weapon will deal more damage, but you can't have a shield. There might be some armor restrictions going on. You're going to need to balance that out with the need for armor class and other things, 1-handed versus 2-handed, or if you're going like a heavy crossbow, it takes longer to reload, does more damage, pushing that out, exploring it from that perspective. But generally, I want to try and start with that highest value dice that's possible. I want that D8, D10, D12. Certain characters, like a wizard, you might only be able to do D4 because it's a dagger or a sling, but you have the magic. From there, we now want to start stacking on those plus bonuses. So that +1 sword to hit, +1 damage, that's, again, huge. If you can build it up, +3 damage. If you have a chance that certain feats, or in the older like 3.x rules, keen, that allowed you to do more damage or push the critical, increases your damage output tremendously. Just like to hit, having that +1, +2, +3, +X bonus, massive. Think about that sword. Let's just look at a long sword. So I put the D8 there. I then kind of add, based on the magic and based on some feats, I would do 1d8 damage +3 for inherent magical bonuses and whatever else. Now you want to look and say, how can you stack on other dice to add to that? Shock, fire, sonic, where essentially you could take that D8, put it in front of your character, and also take out a D6 and say, here's fire damage. Yes, there could be resistances. We'll put that aside. How can you add other dice through magic, through abilities, to that initial base dice, plus your bonuses, your +1, your +2, your +3? That's generating the dice pool. That's where you want to generate. Now we move to the third piece, the final piece of the D&D Math Hammer equation. And this is naturally a little bit harder to do. You're going to have to look at magic items. You're going to have to look at feats. but the perfect example is poison. First, you got to land the hit. You land that. Then do the base damage. Then you possibly do poison damage. Maybe there's a saving throw. Maybe there isn't. But as soon as you initiate that poison damage, or it could be a slow type spell, it could be some ability where it causes a bane against the monster. So when they roll a d20, they got to roll 2, take the lowest. Effects that are in play where you don't have to go through the hit and the damage first. They carry over that round or into next rounds. That's also huge because it's going to cascade. It's going to make damage. It's going to make things next turn that much easier for you. So I'm not saying, you have to math hammer and theory hammer everything, but you can in D&D. And it's interesting because certainly D&D has evolved and it's an amazing game. But if we look at its genesis was and is in wargaming, understanding dice pools, understanding ways to build dice pools and leverage them. That's D&D 101 back in the day when it was chainmail. So having a little bit of that knowledge, whether you want to use it or not, to build an extremely powerful character in combat is entirely up to you.